Hello and welcome to Media Monitor on the SABC News Channel, independent and impartial. Now this is where we take a look inside the world of media, analysing the trends, the issues and the reporting of some of the week's top stories. I'm Peter Ndoro. This is what's coming up on the show today. Technology has changed everything about how news is gathered and delivered, giving rise to citizen journalism, media activism and other kinds of speech. And we ask if it's possible to draw a line between journalism and activism. And in our Back in History feature today, well, we go back to, you'll find out which year, that's a little bit later on. And we'll also be talking about violence against female journalists, particularly online. And that's starting to spill over, unfortunately, into real life. And we speak to somebody who's just done a survey on that, and the numbers are quite scary. All right, remember, you can also engage with us on social media using the Twitter handle, #SABC Media Monitor. And we'll also share your views on WhatsApp number 065 862 4548. So before we get into those highlighted stories on the program, let's first take a look at what's on the front pages of the Sunday newspapers this morning. And we start with the Sunday Times, and the Sunday Times is leading with a story that describes a COVID-19 cloud hanging over Christmas. Yeah, a surge in new infections in the Eastern Cape is believed could trigger a second wave in the new year. The top COVID-19 experts have warned that unless the resurgence in Nelson Mandela Bay is not contained immediately, South Africa risks spending January engulfed in a second wave of the pandemic. The City Press headline reads that the ANC factions to back Cyril. Yeah, the paper reports that as President Ramaphosa's detractors sharpen their knives ahead of this week's vote of no confidence, ANC leaders say that the party will close ranks. Two of those party officials say that the ANC MPs will fully back the president when he faces that vote of no confidence that's been brought on by the African Transformation Movement. The Sunday Independent's main front page picture is that of the late football icon Diego Maradona, who died this past week of a heart attack. The lead story, though, is headlines the Zondo Commission must summon President Ramaphosa. A prominent lawyer, advocate Ngalwana SC, says that President and others who served in former President Jacob Zuma's cabinet should all appear before the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture. In a request to the Commission, Ngalwana blasted the manner in which witnesses have been chosen so far. The Sunday Tribune is leading with a story that is seeing former soldiers demanding compensation. A high-level panel on military veterans, led by Deputy President Mabuza, has said that all cabinet ministers are fully cooperating in assisting military veterans with a myriad of challenges that have been brought to the attention of President Ramaphosa. These challenges include living conditions, employment, housing and medical care. The Weekend Argus on Sunday is leading with indications that the Western Cape provincial government is looking at tough plans to contain a COVID-19 surge, which may include a hard short-term lockdown. And this is amid increasing coronavirus infections in the Cape Metro and along the Garden Route, which could affect festive season activities and holiday plans for many residents as well as visitors. In the past few weeks, the province has felt the effects of what's being described as super spreader events. And finally, the Sunday World's front page story reads VBS looters to lose bling cars. Yeah, 6 high-end luxury vehicles are to be auctioned off, but the VBS curator is not hopeful that he will recoup all the 24 million rand siphoned off from the company. All right, let's take a look at some of the trending topics on social media, because after all, a lot of you use Twitter as your main news source. And this is what's trending. The usual suspects, Sacred Space, and then there's others, the Jake Paul, but the top two are the ones that really grabbed my attention. Can you believe these guys are in their 50s? Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. Were fighting yesterday, a remake of an old fight that they fought, and Snoop Doggy Dogg was the commentator for the fight. So let's just take a look at some of the messages that have been coming through. And apparently this was a draw, if you can believe it. I mean, there's enough judges to not make it a draw, but there you have it. And then, so this is what people are saying. Tyson and Jones, after each round, they were tired. They were knackered. I just couldn't keep up. Roy Jones Jr. just wants to go to bed now. This was after the fight finished. And for anyone who didn't watch the fight, this is what you missed. And there's two old men hugging. This is how people saw this fight. A Tyson draw, people are surprised, can't believe, and I get a sense that people thought that Tyson might have won the fight. And then, can we all agree, Snoop Dogg won the night? Apparently his commentating was legendary, perhaps the highlight of the program, the whole event itself. So Mike Tyson, Roy Jones Jr., when they were much younger, they were amazing. But yeah, in their 50s, probably not so much. Now, we're in an era which technology has changed everything about how news is gathered and delivered, where citizen journalists and media activism play a role in news dissemination. Now, the advent of blogs and online media has raised new questions about whether it's possible to distinguish between journalism and activism, as the volume, complexity and speed of information dissemination has increased. The process of defining journalism has become more difficult. And we ask, is it necessary to draw the line between journalism and activism? All right, well, we're hoping to get hold of Christopher Plater. He's joining us on Zoom. He's the Africa correspondent for German media and director at KS Media Africa. And he wrote an interesting article where he's saying that we should be journalists and not activists, but more and more these two seem to be blurring, and we'll find out after this break what he means. Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor on the SABC News Channel. Okay, so we're coming back to that story that I just started before the break, and that's the issue of journalism blurring lines into activism. And is there a line that you can clearly see that differentiates the two? And we're seeing journalists, apparently, according to Christoph Plater, that we're seeing more and more journalists perhaps becoming activists, and that they should stick to journalism, stay in their lane essentially. Well, let's talk to Christoph now, who's the Africa correspondent for German media and director at KS Media Africa. Christoph, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Peter.
All right, so let's start with definitions, I guess. What is the difference between activism and journalism in your view?
Well, I think that the pandemic has shown us very clearly, Peter, and it has underlined the need to differentiate between journalism and activism, because we see all over the continent an increase in the demand of serious and verified news. People don't want trash anymore. People want to know what is happening, and therefore journalists have to draw a clear line. Journalists might have their sympathies, be they political, religious, and all that, and that is fine, but it shouldn't show in the news. And we see, as KS Media Africa, the foundation, the media foundation of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation from Germany, we see all over the continent a growing discussion that people need to differentiate. This is activism and this is journalism. And I think it has become ever more so important with the rise of the pandemic.
So where does journalism end and activism start? What kind of language is typical of activism that is different from journalism?
Well, you use a lot of adjectives in activism in order to underline the cause you're talking about. And I think journalism needs to differentiate and needs to filter and needs to have still a gatekeeper role. And too many journalists these days seem to be not leaving newsrooms. They seem to be living in their particular bubble, and that makes journalism prone or easily affected by people who have activist causes. And I think it is very understandable if people feel very strongly for the one or the other thing. Again, be it political, be it religious, be it whatever. But the reader, the listener, the viewer has to understand very clearly that he is a journalist, that he is a presenter who tries to verify news and who's seeking the truth for you as the client.
Is it not difficult though? Because the moment you decide on a guest, even decide on a story, that your own personal biases perhaps are already in play. Because I choose you instead of another journalist to do an interview, doesn't that already put me sort of in the ring of activism then? Because my biases, probably subconscious or conscious, have made me choose one commentator over another.
Well, of course, we are all human beings, and we choose the one or the other interviewee. But then I would expect from you, Peter, and from others, and I'm sure you are doing that, to really ask me hard questions and to make it clear to the viewer that you might sympathize with the view that I expressed in this editorial or in this op-ed piece, but still you would have very serious questions in order to prove that I'm right or that I'm wrong. And I think that's what journalism is about. You know, you can invite me to your program, and we are even in-laws and we are related to one another, as long as we make that clear, and as long as it is clear that you and me, we have different opinions and we are trying to seek the right one and to debate, all that is fine, I should say.
There may be times, I wonder, where some things are just right and that's it. So let's take something like Black Lives Matter, that campaign that ran particularly in the United States. And you had President Donald Trump, who said there are good people on both sides of this debate. And the media went after him. Everybody went after him. Are we saying that perhaps we needed to listen to what he says and maybe find out if it's true that there are good people on either side of that debate?
Yes, I mean, in the case of the Black Lives Matter debate, I think this was just a commentary that he was giving in order to say something, and he has proven very often on which side of this debate he is. So maybe Black Lives Matter is not a very good example, but I'll give you another example. In Nigeria, we had the protests of young people against SARS, which was a special unit of the police that was supposed to be dismantled and that killed many young innocent people. And for example, the Premium Times, an online publication in Abuja, they reported about all these events in a matter-of-fact way. Now, the editor who was editing this, or the reporter who was reporting, they, I assume, felt very strongly for the protesters. Yet they would report it in a matter-of-fact way. And I think that is the important way to do it. We had another incident in Tanzania where we have an online publication called Jamii Forums, where I would assume that the majority of people were not really in favor of the incumbent President Magufuli. Still, they would report about the elections and the rigging of the elections in a matter-of-fact way. And I think that is what is particularly important. And let's underline it again. There's no problem to have an op-ed of somebody who has a very, very particular opinion. And there's no problem, of course, to have a commentary in a newspaper or on a news program, but don't declare it as news.
Do you think that there could be an intergenerational thing where young people perhaps see the world differently around them and therefore report things with a bit more emotion, whereas some of us who are a bit older and grayer we're taught to be very strict, and we stick to those rules, and maybe journalism is changing and we're not catching up with what the new generation are seeing and perhaps the audiences are demanding.
Well, Peter, you and me, I'm sure we were also emotional 20 years ago, and maybe we are still emotional today. But I think the problem that we are having these days, and that has a lot to do with the funding crisis in the media, that we don't have enough gray-haired people in the newsrooms anymore who give guidance. You know, how do you react under pressure? How do you deal with this particular problem? Or did you, young reporter, actually try to also see the other side of the coin? Did you talk to the opposing party? All that is very important. And unfortunately, there are less and less older people in the newsrooms. And I speak to a lot of young journalists who are 20 plus, who say that they are looking for these gray-haired people, a bit older people who have more experience, and that is a real problem. I've just come from a conference in Ivory Coast where we talked a lot about how do we finance media houses these days, and it was a discussion with publishers. And many of the publishers now, due to the crisis, the financial crisis, they stick to interns. Now, there's nothing wrong with hiring interns, but interns should not make editorial decisions. Interns need guidance. So this is an appeal also to publishers and broadcasting houses to actually see to the fact that you need gray-haired people in newsrooms.
I've got a feeling that perhaps the last bastion of sort of fair journalism is just the public broadcasters in each country, because I look to America and I tune into Fox News. I know exactly what I'm going to hear and what I'm going to watch. I turn into CNN and it sounded almost like it was the other side. And I just wonder if commercial pressures and audiences, because you've got to get numbers, that the reporting is now being skewed more towards what they want to hear as opposed to what's happening on the ground.
I think that is a real danger. And it has to do a lot with media literacy. Media literacy, not in the sense of teaching school children that reading a newspaper is good, but of creating the awareness also amongst media consumers that don't always consume media that really reaffirms and underlines your own opinions or maybe prejudices. I think it's intellectually far more challenging and interesting also to read those papers that politically maybe I don't agree with, and to watch television shows that I think portray things the wrong way, because after all, this is also mirroring a part of the discussion that we have in each and every society.
Matthias Döpfner says that we are witnessing more and more journalism that only reacts to events rather than journalism that reflects, journalism that initiates debates. Increasingly, journalism tends to confirm the supposed opinions of its readers and viewers and listeners. I'm just wondering, when we say that reflects, isn't that reflection opinion?
It can be. I mean, you can reflect and you can portray the pros and cons. But of course, opinion is always there in journalism. And of course, we need opinion and we need commitment. But I think it is important to label opinion as opinion and not try to sneak opinion into news pieces, into news reporting. And I think in the reading and viewing public, there's a growing sense that this is what has been happening in the past few years. Other than that, I cannot explain why this rise in demand for verified news is there. I mean, if I look at an organization like Africa Check, with offices in Johannesburg, in Lagos, in Dakar, and in Nairobi, they are witnessing an eightfold increase on their website and their social media channels, which is an expression of the public's demand to really know what is verified news. And in the media, yes, the media can give guidance through opinion, through debates, but it should be labeled like that.
All right, so I'm going to give you another example, and it's an example that I use quite often when we're chatting about points of view. In a football match, a penalty is taken, the goalkeeper saves it. One newspaper says the player missed a penalty, and then another newspaper says the goalkeeper saved the day. Both are true. But I guess this is where now the problem lies, where they can be both factual, but they tell a different story.
Yes, I mean, it's the old story of the glass being half full or the glass being half empty. Luckily, in the case of the penalty and of the soccer match, these decisions, how to describe it, doesn't really affect people's lives. Maybe it affects the mood of the fan from the one team or the fan of the other team. But I do think that, for example, in very heated political campaigns and election campaigns in many African countries that we are witnessing, particularly this year, journalists' responsibility to leave their own opinion out of the reporting and out of the news coverage is very important, because it can affect people's lives and it can change people's lives. So I think, to be opinionated about a soccer match is different than to be opinionated about.
I guess maybe let me use another example then. Let's go to, I don't know, any country in Africa. One report could say activists have been arrested. Another report might say the police maintaining law and order. And they're both factual, but they're really quite different. And I just wonder, how do you navigate between these two perspectives?
By speaking to the police spokesperson and by asking what the activists were arrested for, by asking a spokesperson of the activists why they were disobeying the police order, whether they should not have stuck to the regulations that were put out, and by presenting these two sides to my viewers or to my listeners, and they then will assess the situation and find out what would be the right judgment. I think that's the way to do it.
All right, so you're saying that we really need to go back to old school, present the facts, both sides, and let the reader decide.
Absolutely, absolutely. Unless we publish an opinion piece, there's no problem with that. But I think, yes, old school is what is required to really draw this clear line that seems to getting more and more blurred.
All right. Christoph Platter, thank you so much indeed. A very interesting chat, and I'm sure one that got people already talking in the newsrooms, because it is a tricky one. But as you say, I think you and I got grey hair. For us, it's pretty clear, but I'm not so sure with the younger generation. Thanks so much indeed for your thoughts and your insights today.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. All right, so that was Christopher Platter from CAS Media saying that journalists are becoming more like activists, and that we should stick to journalism and let the viewers and the readers and listeners decide on how to interpret the facts, and that journalists should just stick to the facts. All right, in about 20 to 32 minutes is going to be the agenda, and to tell us what's coming up, we've got Desiree Chauke. Desiree, top of the morning to you. What can we look forward to in the program later?
Very good morning, Peter, and thanks so much for coming through to us. The Gauteng Education MEC, Panyaza Lesufi, is updating parents regarding the Grade 1 and Grade 8 online application placement process for the 2021 academic year. That's at 10 a.m. this morning. We'll be going through to bring you that, to bring our viewers that live. Our reporter in the Eastern Cape, Lerato Fekisi, will give us a wrap of the two-day visit by Health Minister Dr. Zweli Mkhize to the Metro. We will also get an update of a police raid in Osizweni Township near Newcastle in the northern KwaZulu-Natal. 6 teenagers have been killed since August in gang-related wars. That and more between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. this afternoon here on the agenda. And off to break now.
Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. Every week we try and catch you up with some of the issues that journalists are facing across the continent. And in some countries it really is difficult to be a journalist. Some might even consider it a crime. We begin in Somalia, where the recent passage of a controversial media bill into law by Somali President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo. Somalia's media workers worry about what might lie ahead for journalists who are already struggling in a hostile media environment. The bill, which was signed on the 26th of August, contains 41 articles on the media and how they should conduct their work. The law will restrict media workers and will give the state unrestrained power over the media. This as the country will be going into elections next year. Journalists covering election campaigns in Uganda have faced the wrath of security forces on what seems to be targeted attacks on the media. Police and other security forces unleashed violence on journalists covering opposition presidential candidates Bobi Wine of the National Unity Platform and Patrick Obi Amuriat of the Forum for Democratic Change. The latest attacks on journalists occurred on Wednesday when spontaneous protests broke out in the capital Kampala and several upcountry towns after Bobi Wine was arrested. And sadly, people died in those protests as well. Now, a majority of female media workers say that they've experienced online abuse, harassment, threats and attacks. And a survey fielded by the International Center for Journalists and the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, shows that an alarming trend of online attacks on female journalists increasingly spilling over into real life with actual physical attacks. The survey is part of an ongoing global study commissioned by UNESCO, with South Africa being one of the 15 countries being studied in depth, and of its journalism academics are collaborating on this project. The lead researcher is Dr. Giulia Possetti, the Global Director of Research at the International Center for Journalists, and I caught up with her via Zoom to Oxford in the United Kingdom. And I began by saying that the survey had brought up some alarming findings.
Absolutely, sure. It's an important intervention commissioned by UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, to spell out the acronym, which I'm implementing with the International Center for Journalists and an internationally diverse group of researchers. The survey is part of a broader study which is designed to both map and surface the sorts of impacts and experiences that women journalists around the world are confronting when they do digital reporting, when they try to engage with audiences, and more broadly, when they report on any issue that is contentious. We're seeing significant spikes and really worrying trends with regard to online violence against women. So we conducted this survey in September, and it only finished a couple of weeks ago, and we're working at rapid pace because of the seriousness of this problem and because we want to ensure the findings can be in the field as quickly as possible so that we might respond to them. Ultimately, the broader study, which is looking at 15 countries around the world, aims to try to surface more effective measures of combating the problem. But let's focus first of all on how serious the situation is, and that's what this survey tells us. And the first two data points that we've released from this study, from this survey, are really alarming. The first one, 73% of the women we surveyed, and we surveyed over 1,200 journalists around the world, 73% said they had experienced online violence. And also, we have another startling figure, 20% of the women journalists we surveyed said they'd been attacked or abused offline, so in the real world, if you like, in incidents that they felt, that they thought, or that they had evidence to prove were connected to the online violence they've experienced. And that really signals one of the issues that's concerning journalism safety organisations, civil society, and the UN, and it underpins this work. And that is this notion that online attacks are spilling offline and increasing risks, particularly for women at the intersection of online harassment, disinformation, and misogyny, if you like. But racism and bigotry are also factors that even, further increase the risk.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the online violence. Help us understand what that actually means.
Thank you. Important question. I mean, it's useful to put labels on things, but it's really important to be able to unpack them too. And by online violence, we mean the three main forms of attacks on women in the digital environment. Firstly, online harassment and abuse. So that is not just the sort of criticism that you could expect to attract from the public as a journalist. This is not about valid, fair critique. This is about abuse that is designed particularly to chill reporting. So it often takes the form of sexually explicit or highly offensive statements and comments, angry, abusive remarks that are designed to belittle and humiliate and chill, rather than the sort of fair critique we can expect as journalists for our work. It also includes the digital threats associated with doing journalism in a digital environment. So these include things like hacking and doxing, which is where in a very high-risk situation, we see women's physical street addresses and telephone numbers, their passwords, which have been exposed, being shared publicly. So it's a way to escalate the risk, to trigger what we might term a pile-on, so hordes of others who are either organised or semi-organised in responding to these sorts of targeted threats. And it also includes threats of rape and murder. So really serious threats to do physical and sexual violence to women. So we are aggregating these forms of attack and calling them online violence. And we're doing that deliberately in the same way that activists over the past few decades have talked about domestic violence, for example, incorporating psychological impacts, economic impacts, and a whole range of other impacts. And the same is true of online violence against women journalists, that there are really serious psychological impacts, there are really serious physical impacts, but also really serious professional impacts.
I would imagine that it's more and more concerning that this is turning into the physical realm, where they're taking it offline and actually physically chasing down these female reporters.
Exactly. And we saw, experiences of this manifestation in India a couple of years ago with the murder, or with impunity, in fact, of Gauri Lankesh, who was an investigative reporter in India. And we've seen, in association with that murder, attacks on Rana Ayub, who's another Indian investigative journalist, which have attracted the attention of 5 UN special rapporteurs, pointing to the very experience of Gauri Lankesh as a murdered journalist as a warning that these attacks online, which are prolific, exponential, horrific on Rana, really do raise alarms about the potential for physical impacts. And we saw the same with Daphne Caruana Galizia, a Maltese investigative reporter, who was, attacked, abused, harassed, doxed, all manner of other digital threats against her as well. And she was also murdered in a car bomb only 6 weeks after Gauri Lankesh in 2018. So, this is a real problem with real consequences, and especially in the heat of a year like 2020, where globally, we have seen such rage and such disrespect, in politics internationally with reference to the pandemic, then there are real concerns about what we're seeing now in terms of an escalation of these attacks during the pandemic, which I can tell you we have evidence to support as well. So in another study that I've been doing in parallel with the Tao Center at Columbia University, we found that 16% of the women we surveyed about their experience of journalism during the pandemic said that online violence was much worse than it had been before the pandemic. So, you know, this is a critical moment, and these are very serious issues. And one of the concerns we have as researchers, and many of us on this project, me included, are also journalists, one of the concerns we have is that this is not necessarily being taken as seriously as it should be within news organisations or within the political or legal and judicial environment. Yes, we can say awareness is much better than it was, say, 4 or 5 years ago. People are now talking about it. I'm sitting here talking to you. Journalists have moved on from wanting to not focus on the issues affecting them, which I think is important. But in terms of action, in terms of real and effective policies and law reform, and when especially it comes to platform power, so the social media companies' kind of willingness to take this issue seriously and act effectively and decisively, there are huge gaps. And, you know, this is a really serious situation where women are being driven out of journalism. Women are being driven out of public-facing roles in journalism, and even journalism studies, because of this perceived risk of, you know, not being able to do your job without being brutally and savagely abused, you know, first thing in the morning, last thing at night, every other minute of every other day.
Perhaps as a final question, we know what it means in terms of individual harm, but what will this mean for journalism in general?
Yeah, that's another really important question because, you know, the global discussions at the moment, if we can, as diverse as they are, if we can think about them holistically for a moment, one of the key themes, especially as we try to, you know, reimagine what journalism looks like after this devastating pandemic, diversity. Diversity is critical, right? So this can mean diversity in the context of racial diversity, diversity in the sense of sexual orientation, certainly in reference to gender, and you know, as regards your sex. So we need diverse newsrooms reflecting diverse perspectives that are respectful, that are inclusive. Otherwise, we are going to continue alienating our audiences because we fail to be able to speak with them instead of speaking at them from a position of what is perceived to be increased authority or privilege. And so, therefore, if you are forcing women whose lived experience, wherever they are in the world, is usually different to the lived experience of men, particularly when it comes to the distribution of power and access, you know, to resources and opportunities, then you're going to be crueling the stories that need to be told in ways that are disadvantageous to your news organization or to your audience's, you know, willingness to engage with you, to actually buy your newspaper or listen to your radio program or watch your TV program, or even just share the stories that you publish online. And I think that's something that should really speak to editors and CEOs at this point, that you can't ignore this for two reasons. That one I just shared about audience engagement and the value of your journalism, and two, because you are in a situation where women are being injured. They are being injured psychologically. They are ultimately at risk of being injured physically, and they are being injured physically in some of these linked circumstances. You know, this is a genuine workplace safety issue, and there are real legal and insurance consequences here. So I would have thought the business realities associated with this, in combination with audience development, is something, you know, to be seriously considered. But moreover, as I said, it's the failure of the platforms to address this early and to address this in a way that acknowledges the specific role that journalists play in these communities and their specific role within democracies. So the attitude, for example, of Facebook in the first instance, the first couple of years of this debate was journalists are no different to any other citizen. They don't have any more rights to freedom of expression than the angry man, screaming that they're going to rape the journalist. That, of course, is absurd, and it's also not, what the UN frameworks in the area of human rights law indicate about press freedom and gender equality either. And so that's what needs to be taken very seriously. These platforms need to be safe for everybody, but particularly for those seeking to surface and tell the truth in a critical moment internationally when it comes to access to information.
Juliet Passetti, I spoke to her a little bit earlier on about these issues that are plaguing female journalists that are sadly being abused on an increasing level, and some of that online abuse and online violence is now spilling over into physical abuse and violence. All right, so we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back we'll have more for you on Media Monitor. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. Let's catch you up now with those front pages that we were talking about earlier on, the local newspapers, and what they're reporting this morning. And for this segment, we're pleased to be joined by Ndayedzo Netonze. Thanks so much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Yeah, good morning, Peter.
All right, so quite a spread in this weekend's newspapers. Generally, they tend to focus on the same story, but quite a range today. But I know that you're interested in the Sunday World. Why is that?
Well, the Sunday World is leading with VBS looters losing a couple of expensive cars. So there's a company that benefited from that 2 billion rand that was looted from VBS Mutual Bank. And the curator, Anosh Ruplal, managed to recoup some of the funds there from that company. And the company is Fimanox. It allegedly received at around 25 million rand or so. But the vehicles that have been recouped are not, it's not that much in terms of the value. And he's not confident, and Anosh Ruplal, that is, that they will be able to get the full 24 million rand that was looted by this company. But, when you think about those gogos and the Stockfells that lost the monies by the looting, it's okay to have something than nothing.
All right, it is a concern, isn't it? And it's probably going to be a recurring theme where all this corruption, we're never going to quite recover, and the taxpayer, citizens actually end up being the victims in more ways than one.
Yeah, and it's quite sad, with VBS, it's not like what was looted from the state where you would have the intervention, for example, the Asset Forfeiture Unit or the SIU coming into play and being able to recoup some of the funds. With VBS, it's going to be a mammoth task. Most of what's happening is more of criminal cases than civil suits. And with the civil suits, I spoke to Ruplal not so long ago, a couple of weeks ago, and he was, showing that it's going to be very difficult to recoup that 3 billion rand. But if you are somebody that had invested 100,000 rand in a Stockfell and you are able to get 10,000 rand, it's something than not getting anything at all. But also, Peter, if you go to page 2 as well of the Sunday World, there's an editor's note there. You'd remember during the course of the week, there was a WhatsApp or screenshot of a WhatsApp group that was circulating, the so-called Tumamina group. And here, the editor of the Sunday World identifies the political editor as being part of that WhatsApp group. So this is one of the newspapers that I see have decided to launch an investigation into this matter to see if indeed there's any authenticity to the allegations that the WhatsApp group was created to advance the interests of the President Cyril Ramaphosa.
All right. I want us to go to the city press now, actually, because it looks like an old theme is playing out again, where sitting president is facing a vote of no confidence, and the ANC, no matter what their feelings, internally seeming to be closing ranks.
Yeah, and I would be surprised if that vote of no confidence even gets to get support from the other smaller parties. The ATM, they say bring a no confidence and vote, and the Speaker of Parliament, Thandi Modise, agreeing and granting that motion of no confidence to take place. But, the former president, Jacob Zuma, faced at least 7 vote of no confidence in his term and in his tenure as president of the country, and none of them succeeded. So I strongly doubt that that would be the case with the President Cyril Ramaphosa. The ANC has always shown a united front when it comes to this kind of issues, and I strongly doubt that they would go to any other direction. They have the majority anyway in Parliament, and even if all the other opposition parties vote together, the prospects of it succeeding are close to nothing.
All right. The other paper that also kind of got my attention, Sunday Independent. On the front page of that one, we've got a picture of Diego Maradona, who of course was iconic in football. But on the left of the front page, you've got Advocate Ngalwana saying that President Ramaphosa must be summoned to the commission and everyone who served in President Zuma's cabinet.
Yeah, and no surprises there. I think the president, Cyril Ramaphosa, has said that he would appear at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry. But Peter, there's about, give or take, 4 or 5 months left before the Commission of Inquiry comes to an end. And I don't think they've even covered the actual groundwork. Yeah. When you look at the former president and what has happened in the past week and a half with regards to him not wanting to appear before and wanting the Deputy Chief Justice to recuse himself, I'm not too sure if the current president, Cyril Ramaphosa, and everybody that served under former President Jacob Zuma would be able to appear before the commission before it completes its work around March. I mean, we're going into the festive season, and my assumption would be that the commission will take a break for the festive season, come back at around mid-January, and then there'll be about 2.5 months left for the commission to complete its work. So I was waiting for that period where President Cyril Ramaphosa would appear, because he has indicated before that he's willing to appear before the State Capture Commission of Inquiry. The question is if he will, and if he does, when will that be?
Yeah. All right. And we're going to have to leave it there, but thanks very much indeed for your insights on what's on our front pages today. Thanks for your time.
No.
All right, thank you. All right, and with that, that's how we come to the end of this week's edition of Media Monitor. Thanks so much indeed for joining in. I hope that you'll join us again at the same time next week at the same place for more of the same. In the meantime, COVID-19 is real, so please follow those protocols. Wash your hands, sanitize them, social distance, stay at home as much as you can, and wear a mask and wear it properly. Take care.